He averaged last year 5 catches for 92 yards on 10 targets in this matchup. Good for 18-plus yards per reception. I'm going to put my money where my mouth is as a long-suffering Vikings fan. One of my observations has always been that we cannot stop the opposing number one receiver. So let's get into some Week 13 plays. Once again, I feel very good about all these. They're very good. They're data-backed. Doesn't mean it's going to hit, but these are good. Last week, we went in on Mike Evans, and that hit, and we're back. By the way, with a very realistic or very low number at the end of the day. It might not even be realistic, honestly, because his snap share last week was pretty low. Let's take a look here. Where the heck was that? He was only at like 56% or whatever. I think he'll be up over higher this week with his second game back. The Panthers deploy single high looks at a top 3 rate. Most of it comes in the form of cover 3. Mike Evans, who, by the way, last week in that somewhat minimal return to action, ranked second among all wide receivers in separation win rate. So the hamstring wasn't an issue. Against single high, he has averaged 3.7 yards per route run. Actually, no, last week in a very similar matchup, he averaged 3.78 yards per route run. Since the start of last year against single high, Mike Evans gets a 56% yards per route run boost. His .63 fantasy points per route run against single high trails only Tyreek Hill, Nico Collins, A.J. Brown, Justin Jefferson, and C.D. Lamb. He also ranks top 5 in fantasy points per route run against cover 3 since last year, and top 4 this year. He gets a friendly matchup often against J.C. Horn. He averaged last year 5 catches for 92 yards on 10 targets in this matchup. Good for 18-plus yards per reception. I'm going to put my money where my mouth is as a long-suffering Vikings fan. It's one of the reasons I've made a career out of fake football, because we're not winning crap in Minnesota in my lifetime, but we can win some fake championships. And one of my observations has always been that we cannot stop the opposing number one receiver. If you have a good number one receiver and you want to get him the ball against Minnesota, doesn't matter what coverage, shell, scheme, players, does not matter. We can't stop your ass. So Marvin Harrison will go over 51.5 receiving yards. I mean, it's actually not the greatest schematic matchup because they play a lot of too high, and that's not a great shell for Marvin. But the Vikings still do allow the 3rd most schedule-adjusted fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers, and the 4th most receiving yards per game to wide receivers, and the 10th highest yards per route run to outside receivers. I think you'll see a lot of Byron Murphy, who is not that good, and he gives up a healthy .30 fantasy points per route run. I don't normally go in on big name guys with high numbers, but this one here is a little bit of an exception, and it's too good to pass up. Jamarr Chase over 77.5, and this may take a while. I have a lot of data here. Bengals have faced the league's 2nd lowest single high rate, and that's probably because teams are afraid of Jamarr Chase against single high looks, because he averages .76 fantasy points per route run, 2nd best at wide receiver this year. His yards per route run against single high grows from 1.94 against too high to 3.16. So he gets a 63% boost in yards per route run against single high. Chase has been targeted 32% more often against single high, which, of course, the Steelers run at the highest rate in the NFL at 71.6%. To make it even more appealing, the Steelers run cover 3 on 44% of opposing dropbacks, and Chase averages an absurd 4.41 yards per route run against cover 3. That is the best in the National Football League. Even more encouraging, Joe Burrow sees a 20 1% boost to his YPA against cover 3. And finally, we are projecting Joey Porter to shadow T. Higgins. And the presence of Higgins has really opened things up for Jamarr Chase, so I feel really good about that one. Also like Will Dissly yet again. Falcons run zone coverage 74.5% of the time. That's not a good look for Ladd McConkey, who sees a 41% drop to his yards per route run. Meanwhile, against zone, Will Dissly is getting targeted on 30% of his routes against zone. He leads all Charger receivers with 2.91 yards per route run. That is a mark that is second among all tight ends. And this year, his 0.61 fantasy points per route run against zone leads all tight ends. He is on the injury report with a groin. I know he was working Thursday. He also, this is absolutely ridiculous. He sees a 600% boost to his yards per route run against zone since the start of last season. That's pretty ridiculous. Moving on. And this one better hit or else I'll be pissed. Ramondre Stevenson over 50.5 rushing yards. He had 20 carries for 88 in this matchup last year. Pats are playing at home against an inferior opponent. I think he should get volume. Running backs are seeing 24 carries a game against Indy in their last 4. It's good for a fairly promising 4.3 yards per carry. He's not going to go for 100, but he's got to get at least 51 yards, as Cooper Kupp has to get at least 64.5 receiving yards. Saints allowed the 4th most schedule adjusted fantasy points per game to wide receivers over the last 5 weeks. I think they'll crush. Kupp has got 5+ receptions, 7+ targets in each of the last 6 full games. The Saints are a top 5 pass funnel as well. And also Tank Dell. I like Tank Dell here. Jaguars have allowed the most scheduled fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks and the second most to wide receivers. They run the second highest rate of man coverage, and Dell averages an excellent 2.5 yards per route run. Jameson Williams crushed in this matchup last week. So those are 7 of my 8 props. We do have one more to go. The best bet for Week 13 is, in fact, here's to you, Bijan Robinson. Heaven knows you're balling the F out, and you'll go over 70.5 rushing yards in this game. Great schematic matchup here for Bijan, who is going to get a lot of those zone runs, and they're pretty bad covering zone runs. Tyler Algier, by the way, is not really a factor over the last few weeks. So we're looking at a great schematic matchup here for Bijan Robinson, and he will crush it. He'll get at least 71 yards in this one.
Thanks for watching, but don't let the betting insights end here. If you want an extra edge this football season, you can get a month of VSiN Pro right now absolutely free. That means access to our betting insights, analysis, and tools like our betting splits at 0 cost to you. Click the link in the description to sign up.